The Aviary, a short story by Dacé Willow. Click, click, tap, 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 shk, shk, click, click, tap, tap, tap. A new crack had formed overnight. Not at all unusual. In fact, emerging cracks were a normal part of life for the birds in the aviary. Nothing to fear, so long as there was a swift response. Bird Build Repair Team number 14 was already busy, gluing, weaving, binding, and fixing the crack by the time the great light was beginning to rise in the aviary. The great light began to illuminate the aviary every single day at 6 a.m. sharp and would dim precisely at 6 p.m. The great light connected to the wires of life, which ran through everything in the aviary. The wires of life allowed the aviary to stay always at a comfortable temperature for the birds. They caused the bird seed dispensers to function properly, and they powered the mechanisms that moved water through the entire system for drinking, bathing, and to create pleasant effects, such as mist and waterfalls. As Bird Build Repair Team number 14 worked on sealing the crack, Belle, a young bluebird, who was still training on the job, pulled a twig tight directly next to the crack, and at that moment happened to catch a powerful but subtle scent in her beak. She didn't recognize it, yet she did. Sort of like déjà vu. She paused. "Do you smell that? What is that smell?" she asked Baron, an older robin working nearest her. "Oh, that's right. You're brand new. You'll get used to it. That's nothing. Do this job for 100 illuminations of the great light and you won't even notice it anymore." "It reminds me of something. Doesn't it seem sort of familiar to you?" Belle inquired. "Sure, if you allow it to affect you and break your concentration. I remember being curious too, but you have to make a choice to focus your mind on the task at hand. If you get distracted, goodness knows what could happen. Okay, enough tweedly-deet. Let's get back to work." "Okay," said Belle, confused and curious. But after all, she was new and she wasn't a baby bird anymore, so she would need to stay in the good graces of her superiors in order to maintain access to a birdhouse. She hopped back to it. Later that evening, as the great light dimmed and the projector cast images of stars across the vast dome roof of the aviary, Belle found herself feeling uneasy. She busied herself packing bits of fluff and straw into her birdhouse, reflecting on the feeling that had filled her on account of that smell. It was so familiar, she thought, but where do I know it from? At around mid-darkness, she decided she better get to sleep since she had another day's work bright and early in the morning. The words, "early bird gets the worm," flashed in her mind, almost like an annoying song stuck in her head. Belle and the others continued in the coming months to keep a steady routine doing repairs to the aviary as it continually cracked. For generations, no crack had grown beyond the width of a long caterpillar. A point of confidence and proof of success for the citizens of the aviary. One night, while most of the birds slept, a great crash suddenly rang out, jostling every bird awake at once. Fluttering out from her birdhouse in a fright, Belle looked up to find an enormously long, thin crack spanning the height of a lodgepole pine, cutting directly into the roof of the dome. The crack let in a soft, glowing light, pinkish gray gold, which softly illuminated the aviary. Belle puzzled at what she could possibly be looking at. Then a gust of wind rushed down and over the birds like a wave. When it reached Belle, there it was again, that familiar smell, but it was much stronger this time. The air was rich and alive with it. At just that moment, an electrical wire that spanned both sides of the crack was being stretched to its limit and burst. Zap! Whoosh! A small fire ignited and caused a trail of smoke to quickly reach the smoke detectors and trigger the sprinklers. Belle noticed the rubbery hose smell of the sprinkler water in contrast to that mysterious scent. She paused, then, "Rain! It's the smell of rain!" Belle shouted, almost involuntarily. "It's rain!" An increasingly chaotic din of chirps and flutters and rustling and hustling was arising. The on-call reserve emergency repair birds were already arriving to begin surveying the scene and get busy sealing up the crack. Many birds flew around in circles, frightened. Belle's neighbor, Finch, heard her shouting and flew over to her perch. Belle, calm down now. I know this is overwhelming, but don't lose your head. Rain isn't real. You and every other bird in the aviary know that all water comes from the well and depends on the functioning of the aviary. Rain is a myth put in your head by peacocks who don't understand the price of freedom. A bright light flashed green, signaling everyone to listen as a voice came over the central intercom. "Emergency forces are hard at work fixing the problem. The damage is significant, but please know that we have the situation under control. Please promptly return to your birdhouses." Finch flew back to his perch with a final nod of warning. Belle turned and hopped back to bed, feeling both shocked and confused, but also somehow hopeful and curious. Belle couldn't fall asleep. She felt an energy in her heart, and it pumped through her veins. In the early hours of the morning, even before the first dim glow of the great light, she began to hear a noise. At first it was so faint, she thought she was imagining it. A soft, irregular tapping against the dome. Unlike the tidy tap, tap, tap of beaks or tools, it wandered without repeating itself. Then came another sound beneath it, a low, steady hush, like thousands of tiny wings brushing past one another. Belle crept to the opening of her birdhouse. The crack had widened just enough that droplets were slipping through, catching the glow of the emergency lights as they fell. They did not spray or mist like the sprinkler water. They fell freely and beautifully, effortlessly. When they struck leaves and branches below, they burst into darkened green and sparkled and shined. A drop landed on Belle's head. She froze. It was cool, clean. There was something almost lifelike about the feeling of the drop. Across the aviary, birds were waking again, peering out, fluttering to higher perches. Some cried out in alarm as water touched their wings, shaking themselves violently as though it burned. Others simply stared. It was clear that the sprinkler system in the aviary had not gone haywire. The drops were coming through the crack. "It is rain," said Belle under her breath. The emergency teams worked furiously, but the crack no longer behaved like the cracks of the past. The more they sealed one place, the more water found another. Glue turned to mush. Twine sagged and frayed. Carefully woven patches grew heavy and slipped, and the rain kept coming. It was still not yet 6 a.m., and the great light had not begun to illuminate. Yet a light from a different source entirely, beyond the aviary, began to show through the crack. Very soft at first, then it began to glow pink, orange, and eventually a shining gold, a million tiny drops shimmering as they fell gracefully through the beams. Pools had gathered where there had once been dry floor. The birdseed dispensers sputtered, then fell silent. The great light buzzed for a moment, then tsk, tsk, and sent out a couple visible electric zaps and a puff of smoke, then joined the silence. Birds clustered together, waiting for instructions, but this time, the instructions did not come. The repair teams ceased working, as if they had hit a wall. This was an event so unlike any they had witnessed that it became obvious to everyone that this was not a problem they could solve in the ways they already knew how. It was as if the situation had forced a moment of pause, beyond any of the birds' control. Pools of rain began to form in low places in the aviary. The light that came from beyond continued to brighten until its source became clear and undeniable. A massive orb, immensely more powerful than even the great light, cast thick golden rays of direct light through the crack. The birds tried to look toward it, but they could not look directly at it without being temporarily blinded by its intensity. The sun! I can't believe it. The sun, Belle whispered quietly to herself, shedding a glimmering tear. She didn't need to convince anyone. She knew. And she knew that the other birds knew it too, even if some would be in denial. Suddenly, there appeared a sight so sublime and beautiful, almost as though communicating a message. A shimmering rainbow, precisely where the sun met the rain. Now Belle's tears began flowing freely. Then, the crack widened again, and a large chunk of the upper wall of the aviary fell and shattered into pieces on the ground. The birds nearest the impact flew away in quick, frightened bursts. More rain poured, more sunlight shone through, and the rainbow expanded. The air was absolutely rich with that familiar, no longer mysterious smell. In the following months, more and more pieces of the upper wall fell away. The rain would come and go, and so would the sun. For a while, many of the birds didn't know what to do with themselves, especially the longtime members of the bird build repair teams, who were now, of course, unemployed. Before long, as the emergency birdseed reserves dwindled, sprouts began to pop up where discarded birdseed had fallen over the years, in places where the rain seeped into the ground. And the sprouts grew and grew into sunflowers and other plants that produced birdseed in greater abundance than anyone had ever imagined possible. With all of this time on their feathers, the former members of the bird build repair teams began using their skills to fix up and embellish theirs and their neighbors' birdhouses. Over time, as the builders replaced more and more decaying and broken pieces of the birdhouses with found materials, the birdhouses took very different forms. Belle slowly, joyfully, and proudly transformed her birdhouse too. Though she had only hardly been trained as a member of Bird Build Repair Team number 14, something in her just sort of knew how. It's not that she made her house indestructible or perfect. In fact, she regularly had to replace the decaying pieces of even new material, but she was surprised to find profound joy in the process. A faint memory crossed her mind of reading an obscure passage in a history book, which told about prehistory, a time before the aviary even existed. She recalled the word nest. Nests were regarded as primitive structures built by savage, uncivilized wild birds hundreds of generations ago. It was widely believed that the lifestyles of those ancient birds was brutal, boring, and unsophisticated. But now, Belle could see clear as day that that was just a story. Just like the story that there was no such thing as rain, hence the need for sprinklers. Just like the story that there was no such thing as the sun, hence the need for the great light. She had felt the rain. She had felt the sun. And now she could feel the integrity and joy of building a nest. She laughed. How absurd that she had been convinced to use her nest-making abilities to continually repair the walls of the aviary, returning to a manufactured birdhouse each and every night, exhausted. It seemed absolutely silly now. As the months and years went on, more and more birds began to redirect their energy to building nests, as it became apparent to even the most stubborn birds that repairing the aviary was simply an impossible goal. Birds who had been members of the aviary choir began to sing songs that were not listed in the Book of Birdsong, but which indeed felt sacred. Soon, even birds who had never been taught how to sing began contributing their own unique songs. Eventually, only a skeleton of the aviary remained. Vines and moss grew over the derelict remains of the great light. The wires of life became consumed by layers of dust blown in from the outside, which settled with the rain. Blooming flowers and grasses emerged from the new soil until the wires were no longer visible. The birds had lived through what had always been said could never happen. Or if it did, it would amount to the end of the world. Yet the world had not ended. The story had. The story that had convinced them that the aviary was the world.